Hey, this is Annex again, and in my last tutorial I went over how to set up your drum rack, or how I set mine up, and the different effects I have in the effects chain for my drum rack. And in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you actually use that, and in this tutorial I'll focus more on application and using it in the push too, whereas in the last one I looked at more how to work in session view and how to set it up piece by piece. So once you've done that, you have your drum rack. It's in this track. It's a MIDI track, track 3. If you missed the last tutorial, this is on the third live set I did, and you can watch me play it in another YouTube video that I made, so it's up there somewhere. Okay, so we're gonna double click on this track, and we have, starting from the top again, I hope you don't hear my computer fan too much because it's doing some other stuff in the background. So I hope I'm loud enough here. So here your push mirrors what you see in the session view. So you have the open, I like to have my hi-hats and my higher frequency stuff on the top row of my drum rack. So that's the open symbol. Turn it up a bit. Okay. We turned an auto pan on, I'm going to turn that off. And it's repeating here because I have the repeat button on. So in my push, we're going over this screen, I'm pressing repeat here, it's beside the accent button, and it's on because it's flashing. And the accent button beside it is also on, and accent means it's going to ignore any velocity input that it would otherwise record. So it means every note I play will have a velocity of 100%, or on this velocity scale down here, it's 127 is the max. So then everything that I'm recording is going to be recorded at maximum volume, meaning you don't have any variations in loudness for your different notes that you play. I like to do that again just because the stuff I make is really loud, and this way I record everything the same, and then if I want any variation I'll go back in, and I'll go back in a standardized way. So I'll copy and paste the velocity I want over different sections, just so it's more electronic and more predictable. Okay, so this is my open hi-hat. Wow, that's loud. This is the closed hi-hat. That's okay. So I made it into an open hi-hat, but I'm going to close it by reducing the decay. And you can hear that shortens it a lot. So that's open, and this is more closed. Okay, good. It's not pitched anymore because I think it was at 70 something before, because I was messing around with it in the last tutorial. So we have our hi-hats. As you see where I'm pressing here, this is a 4x4 square on the push. So the push is basically squares within squares, so boxes within boxes, and matrices within matrices. So here we're looking, it's divided itself into 4. So 4, 4, 4, and 4. Well, this is like 8x4, but we'll talk about that in a second. So this quadrant is what you see down here. We're looking at the bottom of my screen now in the session view. So this was the open symbol. This was the close. This is my crash. And anytime I press these, it's going to open up the sample here so we can see what the waveform looks like. This is a clap. And these instruments, so this clap, as well as this hi-hat, this is for max 10 for live. So if you don't see it on your Ableton, it's probably because you don't have the live version, but you can just use any sample. Like this is one of the Kashmir samples I threw in to the simpler. Okay, then we have the snare. God, that's loud. We have a snare, clap, and another snare, and then the risers here. So when I scroll down on the left side, so this is usually the modulator, this kind of flat column thing here. So if you're in a note view, if you press a note, you can modulate it here. So that means moving the pitch up and down by a number of cents when you keep pressing the note. But in the so when you're using a drum rack or an audio rack, or yeah, so this will move it up and down this way. When you look on the screen here, I called it Drummy Boy. So at the bottom, you see these little squares within squares here. This is just what you're moving. So you're moving the view from the higher part of your drum rack into the lower part. So the drum racks can actually get really, really huge. I don't like to make them too big because then it's kind of unmanageable and I forget what is what. So for some songs I like to build a new one just so I can customize it and it's like a fresh new blank piece of paper, a blank canvas if you will. So these are my risers here. Oh, and now we're on repeat, so I'm going to turn that off. And when I press this, you can hear it triggering. And I set my sample, and this is important. I warped it here because I don't know what BPM this was anyway. But I warped it, and this means it's taking it from something that just goes over time to something that's equivalent to bars. And here I see that it will only be 1 bar in length. So then I can, think about that when I'm playing it in real life. I have bars of different lengths and different atmospheres. I also, usually I have them a bit quieter. So if we look here in this chain, not all the, so I don't want all the sweeps and the white noise and things, I don't want them necessarily as loud as my percussion. So I can either decrease the volume here for them, or I can go in sample by sample and decrease the volume here. So at the bottom right of the simpler instrument in the session view. So here I made this rise, so it's rise because it gets bigger over time instead of smaller. I set this volume from -12, which is the default from when you pull it into the simpler, to -16. And again, I discussed this in my last tutorial, but I also have a gate on this. I have a parallel glue compressor, and then I have a auto pan that we played with, but it's off right now. Okay, so we have our rises, and then we also have our down rises. I don't know if they're called down rises, downers, whatever. And I like to put these on the same track as each other, so then when I'm playing live, I don't have to think about, okay, now's the time I have to click a riser, now's the time I have to click another one of these kind of more subtle ambient elements. I can just know when I trigger one of these clips in the percussion that is going to have that already built in. So these clips, I'll show you one, and then we'll go on the push and do it a little that way. So maybe, yeah, okay, I called this one, whatever, hi-hat close up. So what we see here on the screen is just the same as what we see on the drum rack. So when the drum rack, it goes left to right, it just goes top to bottom here. So when I press this, I have to go up. This is my open symbol. This is my close symbol, and you see it's playing because you see the red showing up here on this keyboard roll. And this is the crash, and it just goes down like that. So everything here corresponds to what's on your push. And I say that probably a million times in all these tutorials, but that's what happens. Okay, this is some over there. So the hi-hats, I like to put these on every 8th beats. So let's see how this sounds just as a clip as a whole first. For some reason on my headphones it's all the way to the left, but I think that might be something to do with OBS and not my Ableton. So if it was all the way to your left audio output device when that was playing, it's not supposed to be. Okay, so yeah, we heard how this goes. I'm only playing it over 8 bars for you. So when I'm playing live, let's get rid of this. I go in bars of usually 8 to 16, depending on what I'm looping. So we look up in the session view, I would play like, trigger the first bar here, or the first session here. It plays for 8 bars. So that 16 counts because one bar is 1, 2, 3, 4. Second bar, 1, 2, 3, 4. Third bar, 1, 2, 3, 4. And while that's going, I can think about what's happening next. So we're always kind of one step ahead where the sound is. Okay, so we're looking at this drum rack, and we made a MIDI clip for it, or I showed you how it is. And I like to add little interest in the hi-hat, so it's not just the same thing all the time. And the crashes, the purpose of crashes is to like introduce a new, oh, it really is on the left. Anyway, it should be in the center. So the purposes of the crash is to introduce a new section or a new element or a new change in your song. These up and down is to create movements and a subtle atmosphere that you don't, you don't really hear them when you listen to a song, but when they're not there, you really miss them. So you notice when they're missing, but not when they're there, if that makes sense. It's like having a bay leaf in soup. So you don't taste it when it's in there, but you miss it when it's not. Okay, so if we were going to do this on the push, so I like to do the hi-hat patterns on the push because I'm a little more creative with what the pattern of the hi-hat I want to be is. But with these risers and fallers, I don't want to be so creative. So with this one, I'll start with these and then I'll go up to how you use the push. So with this down riser, so because I'm starting a new section, I have the crash, which gets the energy up right away. It's like, oh, great. And then we have the kind of contrapositive of that. So the flip side, and that's the down. So this downward whoosh. Okay. That's super quiet. Or maybe okay. Yeah, so it's really, really quiet. Sometimes these are way too loud, so I turn them way down and then they're almost imperceptible. So we have the downward rise, and this goes for 4 bars. So it goes from bar 1, 2, 3, 4, and it stops at bar 5. And then when bar 5 starts, I have another down bar. This would be it's in the introduction of this song, so there's not a lot of energy, we're just kind of getting into it. But at the end here, I have an upsweep. So this upsweep is kind of getting the energy up and saying we're going to move into a next section that has more going on in it. Okay, so these are divided into 4 bars per riser and faller, but I can also do over 1 bar and over 2 bars, and you can do things like increasing the energy by layering it up. So you have the down here, actually let's do it here, you have this upsweep, say I'm just pulling over this loop here. I have this upsweep over 4 bars, that's a riser, and then I can also introduce a 2-bar upsweep that's going right at the end of it, so then you're building up. So those are the risers, and another thing I'd like to add on the audio racks, on the drum racks, are glitches. Oh, it's just really quiet for some reason. Anyway, so these glitches, I want them to be pretty regular when I add them to a drum rack. So this means I don't have to go in and trigger them like I would if I were using these glitches that I have in the clips already. One of these is a glitch. So I have both of those, but these ones I've kind of programmed in when I have them in the drum rack to kind of be presented a little more regularly. Then we have the crash. So the crash occurs less frequently than the open hi-hat. and that occurs less frequently than the closed hi-hat. Just because, yeah, they're different elements. So I'm going to pull this over again to 9, and we're going to go back to our note view. And the push knows that we're looking at this track. It knows we want to look at the notes for this track because it's armed. And this is what this little red thing does. So arming it tells it we're focusing on this track. And when you go to the push and go to note, it opens up the notes on your drum rack. So let's focus on the hi-hat. So I'm going to click, oh, that's loud enough again, I don't know what happened. Okay, so this is our closed hi-hat. And you see here, we have on the push, we're looking now in the 8x4 section. So we're only looking at the top here. So think of this as like separated into quadrants. So the bottom half we know already is the drum rack. And this quadrant here, this is going to influence what the length of the loop is. So when I'm holding the first one here, the first length increment thing here, and then I'm pulling it out longer and longer and longer when I keep pressing more. So you see how this goes from, 2 bars, 3 bars, 4 bars, 5 bars, 6 bars, 12 bars. Okay, so we're going to focus on the 2 or 4 bar loop. Okay, so let's go 4 bars and just I don't want to hear the other thing, so I'm going to go into my rack and I'm going to solo the closed hi-hat. What is that? So it turns blue here because it's a solo. It'd be the same as if I held solo up here on the push and clicked this button. That's why it's blue, it means it's soloed. Okay, back to this clip we're looking at. So now we only hear the hi-hat, the closed hi-hat. And we see how it's playing. It's going from left to right and top to bottom. So I'll let you look again and just watch it while it's playing. Okay. And so you see, to get to the end of this 4 bar loop, it has to go through this twice. Let's make it maybe easier example. We're going to open up a new MIDI clip here, and we're going to make it 2 bars long. So then we're not thinking about what's one view and what's the other view. And let's go in and add the closed hi-hats in the same way that we just heard. So they're still solo, that's why they're blue. So this is going to be our first one, and again I'm on accent, so they're all the same. So what does this sound like? Oh, press it up here in session view. So this is every half note that it's hitting. And to add more, so if we want an even interval, so we're going to add the same, we're going to kind of duplicate this square over here. So it's twice as fast. And then again, if I want to make it sound twice as fast as that, so the tempo seems more energetic, I do that again. And then we're going to add a little interest. And usually I add interest at the end of the bars, at the end of the loops, but you can see what fits with your song and what style you're going for. And you can do it while it's running, and that's the beauty of the live and the push together, because you can play around with this. Make some sort of like trappy thing there. Yeah, don't go too crazy unless you're doing some really cool contemporary postmodern stuff, because you can tend to lose the beat pretty easily. So yeah, it's good to think about your symmetry and then how to deviate a little bit from that symmetry in a way that's still, yeah, technically correct, but also you can kind of get the rhythm in your head easily. Because if I do something like this, okay, well, you kind of get it, but it's harder for me to find the rhythm, and then it's less enjoyable for me because I have to consciously think about, okay, what am I actually hearing? Versus if it just clicks and makes sense automatically if I can find the rhythm subconsciously while I'm listening to it. So the last thing I'll talk about here is something I like to do, which I think is also done a lot in techno. So we have this as an even bar here. So we have it running over 2 bars, and when it loops, it just goes, oh, it's driving me crazy. There. And when it loops, it's running back to the beginning, and everything else I have in this song is on the same 4/4 time this way. This one. Okay, and then I can, so you hear every time, so every 4 bars, 4 or 8 bars that you go through in your projects, you're hearing the same order of hi-hats. So you make it a little more interesting by moving it like this, and I think this is the equivalent of doing 5/4 time signature, but we're still keeping the 4/4, we're just accommodating for it by changing the bar, the loop length. So now if we listen to it, so you hear that those 3 notes in a row, you hear them always a little bit later every time. So it creates a little subtle difference and a subtle rhythm that can be quite nice. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to cover in this tutorial. So I showed you my drum rack with the instruments, and then we went over to the note view, and we focused on the close hi-hat, and we learned what these loop lengths do, so how to work with this right side here, and then how to enter a simple note pattern by using the push. And we also learned that you can do that in real time, so as it's playing. And of course you can also record that. So maybe one last thing to talk about. So say we want to start on a clean slate, we're starting just with this hi-hat again, we're going to click record, this record button on the push. We're 2 bars. Right. It's going over way too many bars for me. Let's start that again. Okay, so it's recording over itself because I only set it to this 2 bar length. But you can also, play around with it, not record anything, and then once you do find something you like, press this capture button or this record in new, and then it remembers the last few bars of what you did and shows it to you in MIDI. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know in the comments if you want to learn anything else related to this. Thanks.